Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another meeting of the Draconic Inquisition. Tonight's topic, well, I'm pretty sure it's night. It's been a few days since we've seen the sun. After escaping the kobolds, we just kept going, and I've heard the sound of brains being slurped in the distance. I'm fairly certain we might be in the Underdark. Anyway, completely unrelated, tonight's topic will be Session 0 and campaign introductions. I'm tonight's host, Inquisitor Hippie.
Hello there, I'm your host for the night, Tank. How are you, ladies and gentlemen, doing out there tonight?
And I'm your co-host, Ramble, keeping it short today.
I am the Token.
And I'm your resident moose.
As I said, tonight's topic will be Session 0 and campaign introductions. Session 0 is not always used when a party is starting a campaign, but it is useful for coordinating, especially if not everyone is especially familiar with the rules. It can be used to coordinate roles inside of a party. It can be used to coordinate backstories between characters, to smooth over any complications that a dungeon master might find themselves encountering attempting to introduce characters in the first legitimate session of a campaign, Session 1. First question, and I'll just throw it up in the air for anyone to bring up. How do you do Session 0 in your campaign?
Easiest way that I've seen. First off, start a group message. Make sure you have contact with your people. Get everyone there on time. Get a little bit early. Say, hey, what are you doing? Give them help if they need it. You're going to have some experienced players. You're going to have some newbies every now and again. Help where you're needed. Sit back where you're not.
Yeah,
let them go along with it.
That's true. Social media has opened up a huge margin of compatibility between players and getting ready and being able to ask your DM questions. Is this allowed? Is this not allowed?
And that's another important topic, is if a dungeon master is going to allow certain feats, certain classes, certain combinations of skills in their campaign before the session starts. So you don't create a character, come in, and the DM scowl and growl at you for making something that's more than a little bit broken, at least in their mind. And coordination for party creation is also very important. You don't want to show up for Session 1 without Session 0 and have 2 barbarians and 2 something or others and just have a very monochromatic party.
Or better yet, a whole entire party of casters.
An entire party of casters without a single meat shield might be interesting, but it may not be the most fun experience.
Right.
Sure
It won't be the
Especially if it
longest
doesn't
experience.
really gel with what the dungeon master is doing. If you have sort of a Harry Potter Academy
they can all be from the
thing.
same school.
Yep.
They can all cast differently, but...
And if the party decides that's what they want to do, they want to have an all-caster party, they can coordinate their backstories of how they know each other. Like they went to a similar magic school, had similar mentors, something along those lines. That could be interesting.
Mm-hmm.
But accidental all-caster parties may not work out especially well.
Right, and that being said, you should always coordinate with your DM when you're wanting to do things like that. Like, my campaign has a lot of rogues in it, and it makes encounters a little hard to do when everyone has uncanny dodge and evasion and some kind of damage resistance.
Or everyone's hiding.
Or everyone's just hiding.
They're like cockroaches.
Like cockroaches. This is true. But there's also games, too, where, like, the DM wants kind of that thematic thing, and as a DM, you're able to work around that kind of thing, and I think that's really interesting, too. Like, your proposition, Ramble, of the Amen.
Yes, the Amen.
The all-cleric group.
Which is a great idea that definitely should be done by everybody, everywhere.
And honestly, it really makes, like, it's a really balanced thing for 5th edition. you can have a pretty balanced party with just all clerics, because you got your war clerics, you got your super healers.
So, party balance aside, more along the lines of communicating, if you find stuff that doesn't fit with core rules, like extra classes, you go to D&D Beyond and you say, wow, that brawler there looks really fun. That's another thing that you have to check to make sure, hey, is this extra class all right? Do we need to nerf something? Should we change it so it fits the setting?
Right, and there's a lot of like Unearthed Arcana and a lot of homebrew classes that I've seen, like a bowmaster who's specifically built for better archery than what, say, a fighter or a ranger would do.
Mm-hmm. Like, went on there, found a scholar, and it seemed alright until it increased your max hit points, which I didn't read, and they were like, no, you can't do that. You can't sit there for 5 hours, eat a bunch of food, and all have 1,000 HP. I was like, that makes sense.
Right.
And it's all about communication. As long as you stay communicated, you really shouldn't have any problem starting off your campaign.
Yeah.
As long as everyone's on the same page, and and even if they're not, you just gotta say, look, that's what I'm gonna say as the DM. You can either stay with us or not. That's final on that.
And that being said, from a DM standpoint, or from a player standpoint, when you come to your DM with a character concept and they say no, you have to understand that 9 times out of 10, unless they're a really shit DM, and they just like fucking single people out or whatever, there's people like that out there.
Yeah.
But there's usually a pretty good reason as to why they say no, whether they explain it to you or not.
Better yet, either that or it's the most of the times where you would have a character that would seem okay, but then farther in the line you start playing and the DM is now seeing that it's a problem.
Mm-hmm.
That problem should have been addressed before it even happened. Otherwise, there never would have been a problem.
Right.
Say, for instance, I have a high-level ranger, and he just so happened to be able to fly. Now, the flying was already announced because it came as a racial feature. So the DM should be prepared to deal with a flying member of the party.
Mm-hmm.
But if they're not, and that's a big problem, because now there's one member of the party that has that slight advantage just because it wasn't addressed.
That said, as you go along in your campaign, leaving session 0 and seeing how things work together with your campaign and your players, you just want to make sure you're checking in with them. If you have any issues balancing and saying, oh, well, this is too much for this campaign setting, whether it be a character's personality traits or abilities, just make sure you go back and you address that with the player and say, hey, let's go ahead and work something out here.
Mm-hmm.
Something else that's important with session 0 is the slash in that of the campaign introduction. Mm-hmm. This will be the dungeon master introducing the themes that will be present in the campaign, as well as the general tone and what can be expected out of the campaign before people come in and decide they're going to play an elf. Perhaps this is a campaign setting that is not dominated by elves. They may be viewed negatively on a racial basis. Mm-hmm. The character should be informed of this beforehand before they decide they're going to roll an elf. Mm-hmm. And also important for the campaign introduction is setting boundaries. Say, this is going to be a real gore fest. This is very rated R from a violence standpoint, but on sexuality level, everything is going to max out at PG-13. That's usually how I will run my campaigns. Anything more than, the fact that 2 characters are holding hands and getting little kisses in, that's about as high on the sexuality scale as I'm usually willing to let my sessions go. But violence, torture, all of that, most people are pretty okay with.
It's what builds the setting.
It's what builds the setting.
Mhm.
But it's also important, other than what the dungeon master is comfortable with, to discuss with the players what they are comfortable with, so that everyone has a good time. No one is made uncomfortable. It's Dungeons and Dragons. It's a social game. We're all here to have fun, and we don't want anyone to not have a good time based on, say, mention of rape.
So remember, your D&D sessions should be safe, consensual, and informed.
Mm-hmm.
Also, fuck that bard that wants to seduce everything.
Yeah, no.
That's when, if you run
I
into
think
that,
that's kind of what he
just
wants.
raise your DCs.
Raise the DCs,
Yep.
make everything realistic, and worst comes to worst, fade to black. Nobody wants to see that role played out.
And
No,
Well, maybe some people do, and
Well,
if that's the party and the play style,
If that's the
Have
party
at
and the playstyle, as long as everyone is comfortable with
And
it.
if
Yep.
you don't want your bard or someone to seduce your big bad, do the best thing and turn the big bad to this crazy stalker who's just going to stalk that one person. That one person's not going to be able to beat him one-on-one. And now they have made this person uncontrollably love them and chase them down until the end of eternity. All because they wanted to fling.
and there's your plot for the next 15 sessions.
Yeah.
And there's nothing wrong with saying no.
And the good
Yep.
thing is chaos is fun, but there's a limit.
Yeah.
So that said, they're going back to restrictions and whatnot. You want to make sure that you let your party know, hey, you can play an evil campaign. You can go along with that. Or you can do this. If you need to, set up the restrictions on alignments.
Mhm.
Because a lot of people will see chaotic evil and they'll play chaotic stupid. Generally speaking, most people are going to make their characters chaotic neutral. It allows for versatility. It's something you can work with. But just keep that in the back of your mind that, hey, if you need to put restrictions in, make sure you address it early on.
Right, and your basic bitch fantasy campaign is generally going to be made with a good aligned party. Because it's your active storytelling, it's your Tolkien, your Sword of Truth, what have you.
So the truth, that's probably chaotic evil.
But there's, the main character is pretty good aligned,
Okay.
for the most part.
Chaotic.
So I'm going to throw this out here. How have you all rectified issues where you missed something that was very unbalanced or a character that was way out of line in your sessions?
The way I found is best to deal with a character who is out of a player who is out of line with their character, either be it thematically, socially, or mechanically, is just to ask to speak with them in private, usually after the game. Like, hey, this sort of behavior I find is kind of inappropriate, or I think this mechanic that you're abusing is a little broken. We need to rein that back and make a little house rule on how to deal with that in the future.
Mm.
It's not something that needs to be addressed in front of the party unless the entirety of the rest of the party is in agreement and wants to have a little intervention. But usually, one-on-one, take them to the side. It doesn't need to be a public spectacle. Just address your concerns as the dungeon master and hope they listen. If they don't, well, no party member is necessary. Don't be afraid to kick people out.
That's true. My experience, I haven't really had a whole lot of problem people in my campaign. The biggest thing is we had a character that kind of broke my world by destroying a ley line in the campaign without realizing what he had done. So I took that as an opportunity to bring a new plot point around for the campaign. I turned it into something workable, and it made this disaster happen in the world. And the party spent the next 8, 9 sessions going along trying to fix it. So that's always something to do. If it's something in-game that's happened where a character has just done something really unexpected or kind of destructive, turn it into a plot point for the campaign. You can totally do that. Another thing is what we do at the end of our sessions, where we sit down at the table after our session's over and go, okay, like, didn't like, improve upon, tell me what you thought, give me constructive criticism on what you thought of the session today.
And that's a good point. Probably lay that out at the beginning if you're wanting to do something like that, where you give feedback at the end of the session. Just let them know, like, hey, keep an eye out, keep an ear out for things that you think fit within these categories. And we're going to go over it at the end of the session. Don't focus on it, but just keep an open mind on what you want to discuss.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's a pretty good point. I mean, I've only DM'd or SM, GM'd, whatever you want to call it, like 3 times. And it really helps me because I can see kind of what these guys like, what they thought about this, what they thought about that, and it makes me get a little bit better, rein back some things, make things more obvious that I didn't really make obvious. It helps you work out a lot of things, and that all just goes back to communication. As long as everyone's communicating, and your thing may be a little bumpy at first, but it'll be fine in the end. Everything will work itself out.
Yeah, it's like a relationship. We all have a working relationship at the table, and I think it's fantastic.
Is there anything else anyone would like to bring up about the subject of Session 0 and campaign introductions?
I would say Session 0, Session 0.5, going back to the characters as a group, figuring out whether or not they know each other and whatnot. Give them that time to kind of play out their interactions before they get started with Session 1.
Mm-hmm.
I found that in our group, it's nice for us to go and say, take a smoke break, and we all just RP out our characters and kind of figure out the personality traits as we go along before we actually start gameplay.
Right. We're also a roleplay heavy group, too, and not everybody's going to be like that.
That's fair.
Yes.
Going back to last podcast, let people know if this is going to be an RP heavy game style or a combat heavy.
Mm-hmm.
So
Acting out adds character in many ways. Because I have, granted, most of my characters are all lizards, but each lizard has a different personality. One of them is a murdering psychopath that's been through everything. The other one just hates humans. But those two people are completely different.
Are you sure?
it depends on if the other one's near humans.
Yes.
Fair.
You sound the same.
So they're totally not the same. They look different and they have their own memories. Granted, they don't like a lot of people.
Speaking of murdering psychopaths, I think I hear some drow in the distance. We might want to get a move on soon.
I hear some a little bit of brain slurping too. This may not go well.
I thought that was a myth. They actually slurp brains?
Yes.
Yeah, they do, bro. I'm so sorry.
They want your knowledge if you have any.
Ha! Joke's on them. They can't get through this thickness.
There's nothing there.
All right.
Straight.
Well, I think we better be going. Thank you all for joining us. And once again, this has been a meeting of the Draconic Inquisition.